Hello, I am Xarkun. This is World of Warships Legends. On the screen here you see a build for Victor F. Einstein, and I've got two games for you in the Tier 7 American Light Cruiser Cleveland. The first game is with this Einstein build, and the second is with a Norm Scott build. Now, this first game is here to demonstrate the awesome power, and really the horrific power, of the Cleveland's armor-piercing shells. The second game, we're going to be looking at the power of the Cleveland's high explosive shells with the new equilibrium of power skill that has been added to Norm Scott in the row of legendary skills. And we're also going to be contrasting what we get with the HE in this game versus what we get with the HE in the second game. So obviously this game was played without the equilibrium of power skill. Actually, it was played the day before the update went live and equilibrium of power was added to Norm Scott. So here we are firing at this Gneisenau with our HE. We've started a fire, and you can see majority shatters there. 5 full penetrations, 18 shatters. So keep that in mind when we look at the AP with equilibrium of power. Now, however, we're firing when we look at the HE with equilibrium of power. And the AP here, though, 5k on that first salvo, over 5k on that second. This third one is going to land toward the rear of his ship and not do as much, but we're adjusting our aim, we're hitting him center mass there, and we're still averaging around 5k, sometimes even more. Essentially, we are chewing through this Gneisenau like nobody's business. He is aiming at us right now, but I don't even think he's going to get a shot off. His turrets are not going to traverse quickly enough for him to even shoot at us before he goes down. Looks like 2 more salvos is going to do it, and there is the death blow right there. Now, I don't know if you were taking a look, but at the start of that engagement, we started off with something like 17,000 damage. We ended up at the end of it with 74,000 damage. Most of that dealt by the armor-piercing shells to the broadside of a battleship. That is over 50,000 damage in the span of a minute or two. That is incredible, incredibly powerful, incredibly scary for any battleship that is facing the Cleveland and giving a flat broadside like that. Keep in mind, too, that we are, I think, using the punch-through skill on Einstein here, and he is only level 11. Norm Scott, we've got him up to level 16, Legendary 3. So the punch-through skill on Scott, I believe, is completely maxed, meaning we get even more penetration value and more AP shell damage out of that. So it can get even scarier if that is imaginable. Now we're going to shoot some HE at some more lightly armored targets like this Atlanta out here. You see, we are able to pretty easily punch through him and get HE shell penetration damage, as well as light fires and all the rest. Still, though, we do get a couple of shatters, and then we're going to have that Atago out there come and engage us in the near future. Now, I will say, in the lull here between us engaging the Atlanta and Atago, you notice with Einstein, you only get 2 consumables because you don't have access to fully packed. A lot of people have told me that Einstein is a non-starter for them, for some of the American cruisers, because at least on the Tier 7 ones, you're not going to get 3 heals, you're not going to get 3 radars, and you're not going to get 3 sonars. And fair enough, if that's not a trade you want to make for better turret traverse, I understand. But the same thing is going to be true on Norm Scott and Kincaid now, because you have to either choose fully packed for the extra consumables in the legendary row of skills, or you have to choose equilibrium of power, and in that case, you're still not going to get 3 consumables each. However, I think once we get into the second game, you're going to see that the trade-off is worth it. More than worth it. At least in my mind, it is. and we are going to discuss how HE shell penetration damage in this game works. We've discussed over-penetration mechanics with the armor piercing many times. You simply take the caliber of the shell in millimeters and then divide that by 14.3. There is a similar formula that you can use to calculate the HE shell penetration. Of course, all of this is quite difficult to determine what your shells can and can't penetrate, given that we don't have access to any kind of in-game armor viewer. So it is a little bit difficult to know exactly how much armor ships have in exactly which places. Now, though, we are firing at this Atago, and we're going to get into an extended duel with him. This is interesting, of course, because the Atago has much bigger guns than we do. He's got 203mm guns that do a lot of damage with each HE shell. Meanwhile, we have smaller guns, 152mm, and we do significantly less damage per HE shell than he does. However, he's got a much slower reload than we do. In the time it takes him to fire a single salvo with his guns, we can fire at least 2, maybe 3. So, on paper, we have a much higher damage per minute than he does, and it should be, really, if you're just looking at the stats, no contest. Of course, the potential damage per minute you can get with the Cleveland's guns here is not exactly reflective of the effective damage per minute you're going to get in reality, because you're going to have to be doing things like I am here, like dodging shots or trying not to give broadside, not getting all of your turrets on target all the time, and even if you do have all of your turrets on target all the time, you're still probably going to miss some shells due to the dispersion and all that kind of thing. Nevertheless, though, we are whittling this Atago down. He's also whittling us down, and we are eventually going to kill him just as he kills us here. You saw, though, with the HE shells on the Atago, we were still getting a number of shatters on the more heavily armored parts of his ship. I think once we get into the next game, we're going to want to pay attention to the hit indicators of the shells and see how many shatters versus penetrations we get. In any case, this was a pretty good game. We finish it with 123,000 damage done and 3,300, almost 3,400 base XP. So, not a bad one. Now, though, here is the build with Norm Scott, with the Equilibrium of Power skill selected. This increases the HE shell penetration of the cruiser by 30%, minus 2% fire chance, and minus 13% HE shell damage as the trade-off. But that trade-off is not all that bad. I think on this build, we still have a 14% fire chance with the Cleveland, which is great since we're firing the shells just about every 5 seconds. So that nerf to fire is really not all that much of a nerf. If you play side by side with and without Equilibrium of Power, you're probably not going to notice that much of a drop-off in the number of fires you start. And the number of fires you start becomes a little bit less important with this skill because of how much penetration damage you're going to be doing to the ships you're shooting at. So, I guess that is a good segue into talking about just how exactly the HE shell penetration mechanics in this game work. So, if you want to find out what thickness of armor your HE shells can penetrate, what you need to do is take the shell caliber in millimeters, so in this case 152 millimeters, and simply divide by 6. Now there are some exceptions. The British battleship's HE shell penetration is calculated by taking the shell caliber in millimeters and dividing by 4, and I think the same is true of the German cruisers, and I think the German battleships. So those guys have a little bit better HE shell penetration characteristics than all of the other nations. But with equilibrium of power, essentially what you get is the commander skill in World of Warships PC called IFHE, which gives you a 30% bonus to your HE shell penetration. And so in order to figure out what your shells can penetrate with equilibrium of power, or IFHE as you might rightly call it, what you do is take the shell caliber, divide by 6, still the same as regular HE shell penetration, but then you multiply that result by 1.3. So an extra 30% onto that. So what does that add up to for the Cleveland here? Well, it's got 152 millimeter guns. So you take 152, divide it by 6, and you get 25 millimeters of armor, is what this HE can penetrate without equilibrium of power. Now put equilibrium of power on there, what do you get? Take 152 divided by 6, that's 25 millimeters, of course. Multiply that by 1.3, you get 32 millimeters of armor, is what this HE can penetrate. And a lot of battleships at this tier have 32 millimeters of armor everywhere, or at least most places. For example, I believe both the Iowa and the Jean Bart have 32 millimeter bow armor and maybe deck armor. I'm not sure. I wish we had an armor viewer so I could know for sure. But certainly with that penetration bonus, you're going to find it so much easier to get reliable, consistent, and deadly shell penetration damage with the high explosive shells on battleships. So remember when we were firing at that Gneisenau in the first game, how many shatters we got. I think it was something like 7 full penetrations and 18 shatters. Let's take a look at the results that we get on the Jean Bart here, which is, I think, just as vulnerable to HE shell damage as the Gneisenau is, or at least it's a close approximation. Here, with our salvos, we are getting a majority of HE shell penetrations and a small number of shatters. It's almost reversed, honestly. We're up to, 23 full pens, 9 shatters. And as the shells continue to land, the indicators for penetration continue to go up, and so does the damage. And there, on that salvo, we get no shatters. We're up to 60,000 damage. We are still lighting fires. There's another one. So the nerf to the fire chance is honestly kind of irrelevant. I think it should probably be more than just 2%, especially with these light cruisers being able to sling HE out there every 5 seconds with this Cleveland, or of course you got the Atlanta and the Flint, which can do that also. So I think maybe the nerf to fire chance should be a little bit greater. In any case, with our positioning there, we are able to take that Jean Bart down with the help of our teammates in pretty short order. We've got 157 hits, I think, registered with our shells, and 6 fires. So, we're not lighting fires left and right all the time, but we're getting so much damage just with HE shell penetrations that the fires are almost irrelevant. Essentially, we're melting these guys down with high explosive shell penetrations, and the fire is just icing on the cake. And we've already seen what can happen when a battleship turns broadside to the Cleveland. In that case, you can switch to the armor piercing and still get wicked amounts of damage. So the Cleveland, with equilibrium of power on Norm Scott especially, is, in my mind, probably if not the, then one of the most powerful cruisers in this game. At least, especially at Tier 7. It's just insane. There are very few cruisers that can compete with the damage output that this Cleveland can dish out. It is terrifying. And there we're firing at another Jean Bart. And when our shells do hit, then we're getting quite a bit of consistent damage. We've already done over 100,000. We're getting very few shatters. We're going to take this guy down too, especially as we light fires. Basically, he's already dead, and it's just a matter of time and a matter of who gets the kill. Of course, you could say that the Russian cruisers, like the Chapayev and the Kutuzov, have an advantage over the Cleveland in a number of ways. They've also got 150-ish millimeter guns. I think it's 152, same as Cleveland. They also get access to the equilibrium of power skill with Kuznetsov, but they have much better shell characteristics. So they can fire out to 19 point something kilometers. They have very flat shell arcs. Their shells are a lot easier to aim at long distances. Meanwhile, Cleveland has floaty shells, and they're quite a bit harder to aim at longer distances. But the Cleveland does fire faster, and I would say the Cleveland is probably a little bit trickier to play than the Kutuzov especially, and the Chapayev, given that the distance between you and the enemy can be so great, and you can still reliably land your shots. Nevertheless, I would say the Cleveland is probably, when it's in its element, more dangerous and annoying to deal with than either of those two Russian cruisers with this equilibrium of power skill. Now, you might disagree with me on that. You can feel free to let me know in the comments. In any case, though, I think we have demonstrated the ridiculous power that equilibrium of power on Norm Scott gives this Cleveland. It's incredible. And if you're on the receiving end of it, you're not going to have a fun time. If you're on the end where you're dishing it out, you might have a little bit of a fun time being an HE spamming menace. And when the opportunities present itself, you can turn yourself into an AP spamming menace and be even more annoying and deadly and worse. So, whether this equilibrium of power thing being added to the American cruiser commanders is a good thing, I don't know. At least there's a little bit more fairness between them and the Russian cruisers now, but it's just not going to be fun when you're on the receiving end of it. There, we end this game with 3 kills, 125,000 damage done. Nice look at the Cleveland's shell power there. Hope you enjoyed it. If so, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already done that. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye.